week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented. Everybody seemed to enjoy my reviews, and the producers would seem to be more than happy as well. Got lots of nice comments from them as well, and so that was really cool. So thank you very much for your continued support. Again, as per usual, any comments that I do make are wholly my own and obviously have no bearing or relevance to the company that employs me. The whisky industry, and to a certain extent the wine industry, is a bit of a kind of like a weird animal, it has to be said. What you have is, obviously, you have brands, producers, that kind of thing, and then you have companies that are agents or distributors, and it's obviously their job to sell the producer's product onto the retailer, and that kind of thing, and obviously promote the brands and all this kind of stuff. And there's generally no written contracts whatsoever. It's all done on essentially a handshake, which obviously leaves brands open to be able to basically move distributors or agents or what have you, and they do that quite often, it has to be said. So you'll often sort of get a press release from a particular brand saying they want to thank distributor X for all their hard work, but distributor Y is now going to take their brand to the next level. And as a distributor and what have you, that bloody hurts, I can tell you. It's a real kick in the ghoulies, and you put in a lot of hard work and effort, promoting and bringing a brand up. It's sometimes essentially from absolutely nothing to a good volume of sales, and sometimes you think they're obviously never bloody satisfied, and so they opt to move elsewhere. Now, of course, that, I guess you have to say, well, that's life, and one way of looking at it is you can think, well, we've done our job in essentially bringing this brand or this producer into the limelight from absolutely nothing, and yeah, fine, you can be to a certain extent proud of what you've achieved with regards to that. And the same can be said to a certain extent to independent bottling companies. When they first start up, they really need to get their products out there reviewed. They're more than happy to send samples, and then a few years down the line, maybe you've given them a perceived poor review. Maybe they just think, well, we can sell our stuff anyway, don't need to bother with anything else. And again, it kind of hurts, it has to be said, because again, you put in the hard work to establish that particular independent bottling company's bottlings, and essentially it's a case of, well, cheers mate, well, we're off. Anyway, you're probably wondering what on earth that has to do with this week's episode of the show. What it actually has to do with it is exactly the opposite of that. The companies that whose products I'm reviewing today, for example, Bruichladdich Beverage, who own Torvaig and distribute Hinch, W Hardie, that obviously own the Antiquary, Angus Dundee, that own Tomintoul, and Remy Contra, that own Bruichladdich. I've dealt with them for donkey's years, and obviously, as you can see, I'm going to review the Lindores Abbey, and obviously Lindors have only just been around fairly recently, I think obviously earlier this year, and I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that they're going to go down this route, but what I'm trying to basically say is that the other companies are multi-million pound companies. They can sell their stuff without any problem whatsoever, so there's absolutely no necessity for them to send samples and all that kind of stuff. But they carry on doing so, and a lot of the time I don't even have to ask. It's just a new product comes along, and then I don't take it for granted, but I know that a sample will work its way down the line, and although they don't need to have the reviews and the press and all that, because like I said, these particular distilleries and brands are pretty well known, and well, maybe with the exception of Hinch, which again is a fairly newish brand, they don't really need people like me to do anything. They know they're going to sell their product, but they like to have that, you know, and they kind of support people like myself and other you know, other sort of retailers and reviewers and things like that, because they like to do so, and you know, it's all part of good PR at the end of the day, isn't it? So basically what I'm trying to say is a big thank you to all these owners, distributors, distilleries for kindly sending the samples for today's episode of the show, and continuing to support the sort of things that I do and others like me do. So yeah, that's really cool. So anyway, I'm not going to sort of obviously delve too deeply into all these different distilleries. I mean, certainly I've reviewed them on a fairly regular basis. I mean, obviously Lindores Abbey, for example, I reviewed sort of their core, well, not their core, but their components. I think it was back in March of this year, and so now I've finally got the finished article, so kind of looking forward to that. And obviously some of the other stuff is pretty new, and pretty new to market. Some of it isn't quite so new, but anyway, I just thought this was going to be a really interesting sort of lineup, and hopefully, you know, you guys will enjoy it. So I think that's enough waffle. Let's have a look at today's one. Okay, so we're going to kick off with a blend, and like I said, this is one of those brand spanking new products that has just come out. So this is the Antiquary 15-year-old wine cask finish. So obviously 15-year-old blend, finished in ex-Bordeaux wine casks and bottled at 43%. Now, I've been a big fan of the Antiquary range for quite some time. I mean, okay, the no age statement bottling can be a bit hit and miss at times, you know, batch variation and all that sort of stuff, but certainly the age statement bottlings, the 12 and the 21, and are generally pretty much spot on. Great price point as well for, although I can't remember what the price point for this particular one is. I think it's about $39.95, something like that. So really good value for money, harking back to last week. Bottling number 2 me looking at is the Hinch Craft and Casks Imperial Stout finish. So this is obviously blended Irish whiskey, one assumes sourced, finished for a minimum of 12 months in ex-Imperial stout casks from the Whitewater Brewery in County Down. So actually it's pretty light, as you can see. For a stout finish I would expect a little bit more colour, so I think that's going to be interesting. Then we're on to the Lindores Abbey. This is the MCDXCIV, which is Roman numerals for something or other. I'm sure somebody's going to be saying, hey, it's Roman numerals for blah blah blah. Well, yeah, okay. So obviously, as you well know, bottled at 46%, no chill filtration, etc, etc, and it's a vatting of spirit aged in bourbon hogsheads, STR casks and sherry butts. So like I said, you may well like to sort of flip back to the episode that I did, I think, like I said, back in March. So I'm really looking forward to tasting the finished article. So yeah, I think that's going to be really cool. Next bottling we'll be looking at, again, stonkingly brand new release. This is a Tomintoul 16-year-old Sauternes Finish, again bottled at 46%. I don't know how long it's spent finishing in the Sauternes cask, but hopefully it will give us some clue when we get round to tasting it. And the final, or the penultimate bottling, a bit of peat, because I didn't do any peat last week, and I like a bit of peat, is the Torvaig Legacy Series Allt Gleann. I think I've pronounced that correctly, please don't shoot me if I haven't. Again bottled at 46%, first fill and refill bourbon, and sold out practically in, well, pretty much seconds when it was released. It's suddenly become, you know, a real must-have bottling. And the last bottling we'll be looking at is good old Port Charlotte. This is the Port Charlotte Pack 01 2011, bottled at 56.1%. I'll fill the water up in a minute. So this has spent 6 years in ex-first fill American oak and 2 years finishing in ex-Pauillac wine casks. Like I said, distilled in 2011 and bottled in February of this year. So been a while since I've done a bit of pork charlotte, so kind of looking forward to that. So right, gonna take a quick break, go and fill my butt, and I shall be back. Right, butt has duly been filled with water. Oh, I do like a good double entendre. Anyway, let's see what the Antiquary's got for us then, shall we? Lovely nose, really fresh, really barleyed, lovely balance, just a smidge of slightly earthy red cherry fruit. There's a touch of grilled nuts, a little bit of chocolate. It's got a lovely sweetness to it as well, but it's not an overt sweetness. It's not a sugary sweetness. It's a sort of a ripe fruit sweetness. But like I said, the fresher, slightly citric elements are kind of balancing that up really nicely. There's a little, like I said, a little bit of earth, a little bit of smoke as well. I mean, overall, that's a lovely nose. Really complex. Yeah, that's good. That really is good. Let's see what the pal's like. Opens up with more of the wine cask, slight syrup coated fruit, but the barley moves in, the citrus, the freshness comes through on the mid palate, almost a kind of granitiness, a sort of a stoniness, a little bit of smoke, earth, kind of moves back into the wine cask on the finish and the aftertaste. Although it could be said that sort of slight syrup coated red fruit note really kind of like continues throughout. It's kind of like almost like a bit of a bedrock, I suppose. But like I said, it's never too sweet. It's just got an absolutely spot on balance. Little floral maybe on the aftertaste, or almost kind of moving into sort of potpourri kind of flavours, although like I said, it's all kind of kept in check really nicely. Lovely balance of sweetness and acidity, or citricness I should say. Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely gorgeous, well worth the money, and good starter, I think. Okay, so let's move on to the Hinch. So 12 months or thereabouts in ex-Imperial Stout cask. Let's see what the nose gives us. Again, really lovely balance. It's not too overly stouty. Some stout finished whiskies tend to be quite sort of dark, and this is actually really nicely balanced. Again, so it's showing the spirit character quite nicely up front. So you're getting the sort of slightly tropical fruit, barley, and just behind it, sort of underneath, there's that little bit of sort of stouty dark fruit, a little bit of a herbal note, a little bit of sour fruit as well. Again, that is just really very well balanced, and it's not overdone. It's just a classic, it's just classically how to use a finish, delicately, so it just doesn't overwhelm the spirit. That again just has a lovely freshness, not quite so sort of minerally maybe as the Antiquary, but still lovely freshness. Let's see what the pal's like. Chewy, malty, lovely, mouth-filling whiskey. A little bit more of the cask on the palate, so I'm getting a little bit more of that sort of malty, stouty dark fruit, but again the balance is there. I'm certainly getting plenty of barley coming through on the mid palate. I'm also getting some graininess as well, which is again adding to that sort of that balancing aspect. The grain sort of like continues really, and so it keeps the finish quite fresh, but you're still always aware of that that stoutiness, a little bit of creaminess on the aftertaste, vanilla, a little bit of spice as well. It just has a gorgeous progression, which is again something I always look for in a whiskey. I don't want a whiskey to basically just go and sort of, you know, put it all on your palate in one go. I like to sort of, you know, be led on a journey, I suppose, if you like, and it's sort of like maybe open with one thing, maybe return to it, like as in this case, opening with the stout cask and returning with that on the finish, and in between you get the sort of like the spirit character. And yeah, that is just absolutely gorgeous. Again, I can't remember what that's retailing for, but you know, still really very, very good. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Lindores Abbey. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Again, a very, very good nose. If I was being really, really critical, I would say that the STR cask is just a little dominant. I can certainly pick up on that sort of chocolatey STR cask character, certainly from remembering the individual components. I just remember the STR cask sample was very, very chocolatey, and I'm certainly getting an awful lot of that. Not that that's a bad thing, because I like chocolate. There's a little bit of herbal sherry, a little bit of spice, touch of vanilla. It's got a youthfulness, there's a touch of rose petal, a little bit of ginger possibly. I mean, that is a really complex nose for a young spirit. I mean, again, obviously the complexity is arguably being generated by the different cask types, but it's not overwhelmed. You can still get the spirit character coming through, and I believe that somewhere down the line there is going to be a wholly American oak aged bottling, which I'm really looking forward to. Hint. No, honestly, really looking forward to that, because I remember the spirit in American oak was truly fabulous. But this has got a lovely balance. It's got all the cask elements showing. It's got distillery character, and you know, what more do you want? I mean, you know, let's see what the palate's like. That's a lovely palate. Again, we've got lovely progression. It kicks off with the sort of dusty, chocolatey STR cask, a little bit of herbal sherry spice, then moves into barley, apricot, lovely fleshy apricot fruit mid palate, and then the STR cask is sort of coming back again on the end. I'm getting a little bit of almost kind of black cherry, vanilla, spice, ginger, a little bit of soft tannin. That is just such a gorgeous whiskey for such a young spirit, and again it has a lovely progression and it moves through the various stages. It has a distinct beginning, middle and a finish, and you know, at the end of the day, that's what you want. I mean I was tasting a sample last night, and I mean, I won't tell you what it was because it may well end up in an episode of the show, but it was an absolute unmitigated sherry monster. I mean, it made no sort of, I mean, even in the advertising blurb, it kind of like basically said, this is a sherry monster, and it was just utterly one-dimensional. You know, there was no light, there was no shade, there was no progression. It just basically dumped a load of sherry character on your palate, and that was it basically. And it was like, and it was really sweet as well, it has to be said. But anyway, coming back to the Lindores Abbey, again, gorgeous whiskey, absolutely stunning. And really, you know, if you've not bought it, not tasted it yet, and you love good whiskey, I think you ought to try that. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Tomintoul 16-year-old. So, Sauternes Finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? that's a bit unusual. Unusual in a good way, it has to be said. Now, most Sauternes cask finished whiskies tend to give you a lot of thick set honey, chunky honey, late harvested honey. This is actually a lot more citric. It's kind of quite herbal. It's grassy. It's quite surprising. I mean, you know, Tomintoul 16-year-old, the standard bottling, is quite rounded, quite soft, quite full-bodied. Whereas this is kind of giving me more kind of classic, in inverted commas, what you'd expect now of Speyside. You know, it's got that crisp, grassy, slightly gooseberry, green fruit kind of character. Yes, there is some noticeable honey there, but it's really subtle, really well done, it has to be said. In fact, there's not a lot of oak at all on the nose. I'm not getting a lot of American oak either, which basically means that this fresh Speyside character is completely evident. There's a little maturity there. It's certainly not a young spirit, but I guess that sort of part of that kind of feeling of maturity also comes from the oak when it starts to get that kind of what I call a sawdusty kind of character. So I'm not kind of quite getting so much of that, but it's got a lovely grassiness, a lovely freshness, classic Speyside nose, you know, with a bit of weight behind it, a bit of honey, you know. That is actually very, very good. Let's see what the pulse like. Right, the palate is more, as you would expect a Sauternes finish, chunky, thick-set honey, and a lot of it. Although it's not so sweet, again, the spirit has got this kind of almost taut, crisp, citric character, which is just really balancing up that honey, and it really does come through quite noticeably on the finish. It's a little bit of a herbal note there. It's got a lovely balance. I mean, you know, although this isn't like the Hinch beginning and ending with the sort of the cask notes, this is kind of starting with the cask notes and kind of finishing with the spirit character, but it again has a really lovely progression to it, and it's not too sweet as well. Some Sauternes cask can be very honeyed, very sweet. Now I know there's a lot of people out there that have a sweet tooth. I mean, that love the sweeter whiskies. I mean, you know, that's why things like Edredor are so popular, and to a certain extent Oban, because they have this inherent kind of sweetness. But for me, they're pleasant enough. But you know, maybe one glass is pretty much enough for me. I like a sort of a little bit more of an austerity in my spirit. You know, a palate cleansing finish is just absolutely spot on, and this really has it in spades. And again, not a huge amount of American oak. I don't get a lot of vanilla, a lot of cream or anything like that. So again, it's kind of pretty much Sauternes cask and spirit, but it's not kind of disconnected in any way. I mean, often again with, you know, spirit whiskies that have been finished in various casks can sometimes give you a bit of a disconnect between the two. This certainly doesn't have it, but like I said, it kind of kicks off with the Sauternes and then moves through the spirit character and finishes with this lovely freshness. So yeah, another superb whiskey. Right, okay, so time for a bit of peat after all that cask finishing malarkey. Let's see what the Torvaig gives us then, shall we? Young, fresh, barleyed, earthy, salty, sweet peat. A little bit of tobacco leaf. Again, not a huge amount of oak, so lots and lots of spirit character. It's got a lovely fruitiness, a sort of a richness underneath that, and I'm probably going to be a bit offensive to them now and say that there is a Talisker-esque element to it. Oh, I know, they probably hate that, but I mean, I've come across Taliskers, young independent bottled Taliskers, that sometimes display this lovely fruitiness, which is not something you'd normally kind of associate with Talisker, it has to be said. And so it's kind of got that character to it. You know, I'm not saying it's a Talisker clone, far from it. I mean, certainly there's none of the perceived Talisker pepperiness. I mean, this is just an absolutely gorgeous nose. Considering how young the spirit is, it's just beautiful. It really is. It's balanced. It's, for a peated malt, it's pretty elegant. I mean, this is fairly heftily peated. I forget what the parts per million are, but you know, when you look at them and you think, it's pretty heavily peated, but in actual fact the peat is pretty well contained, and it's certainly not a peat monster. It has got some lovely complexity, and I'm really keen to see this with some age under its belt. I mean, you know, it's a fabulous spirit, or now, you know, at such a young age, you know, it's going to sort of mature really nicely. Anyway, let's see what that's like. It's a shade fuller on the palate. I'm certainly getting more oak character now, more vanilla. It's got a more rounded, less kind of citric, less kind of salty, although those elements are still there. The peat is also, again, a little subtler. It has a lovely earthiness to it. We're not talking medicinal peat here, we're talking kind of earthy, salty kind of peat. And so it's certainly not what you wouldn't call it an Isla clone at all. Lovely length. I mean, it really has got some beautiful depth to it. Slight honeyed note, white fruit, apricot. The length is really impressive for such a young spirit. I mean, that's the thing with young spirit. More often than not, when it starts to rely on the cask character, it can often shorten the spirit. You know, it kind of clamps down a certain extent. And this is just for a young spirit, like I say, it is very good. I'm seriously impressed. I can't say anything more apart from that. Seriously impressive. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Port Charlotte. So as we know, Port Charlotte is peated to 40 parts per million, so 6 years in American oak and 2 years in Pauillac casks. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's intense. Big herbal peat, bog myrtle, juicy fruit. I mean, that's the thing about Port Charlotte. It is not subtle at all, but it's not uncomplex. It's not just a peat and a wine monster. There's a touch of ginger, earth, salt, toffee, coffee, marzipan, nuts, grilled nuts, a little bit more apricot. I mean, it has it just always blows me away how much of the spirit character remains even in Octomore. Although sometimes it is a little bit difficult to find in Octomore, but Port Charlotte really does come across with a lot of distillery character still. And again, the wine cask finish is really subtle. Yes, there's some juicy red fruits that you can pick up on, but again, it's all really well contained. And this is, for me, this is the theme of today's tasting, obviously with the exception of those whiskies that aren't finished in wine casks and so on and so forth, that they're all beautifully balanced. They all are not OTT on the finishing cask, and to me that is what a good whiskey is all about. It's all about the balance, and I keep going on and on and on about it. Sometimes I feel like a bit of a stuck record that I keep going on and on about balance, but that is what kind of gives a spirit its complexity at the end of the day. A little bit of wood, a little bit of honey. I mean, that has just a fabulous nose. I mean, it really is. And you know, even though, like I said, it is quite intense, it's not all the be all and end all of peat at the end of the day, and I really think it's just a fabulous whisky at the end of the day. Anyway, let's see what the pals are. Again, the wine cask is a little bit more noticeable on the palate. It's not as syrupy, it's more of a kind of red fruit conserve, I suppose. The peat is still pretty noticeable, herbal, earthy, salty, touch of orange, tangerine, vanilla, a little bit of vanilla, bog myrtle, and the red fruit is kind of, again, the cask is coming back on the finish, on the aftertaste, with that sort of red fruit, that sort of little bit of tannin to sort of join the peat as well. I mean, that's dangerously drinkable for 56%, as we said. Doesn't really actually need any water, but as I fill to my butt, I feel duty bound to add a little drop of water just to see what that does to the spirit. Emphasises the cask note on the nose now. It's a little bit further forward. The peat is dropping off a little bit. It's still quite herbal, still quite salty. Although there's less intensity of peat, there's still a good amount of it. It hasn't all completely just sloped off, which can often happen when you put a little drop of water with peated malts. Yeah, let's see what pass on now. Yeah, a little bit more of the cask orientated characteristics, a little bit more of the red fruit, less peat, still quite balanced, still barleyed, a bit of bitterness now from the oak on the finish, but there's still some juiciness from the fruits. It's a little bit simpler with water, and so from a personal point of view, I really don't think it needs the water at all, unless, of course, you know, you're that way inclined. Of course, I'd never like to sort of tell anybody how to sort of drink their whiskey, but from my own personal perspective, I really don't think that needs any water. It really does kind of like, you know, kill off is kind of the wrong word, I suppose, but it kind of dampens down the complexity element. And although it's still a lovely spirit, I think it just really doesn't actually need water, so I probably shouldn't have put any water with it actually. But then again, if I hadn't put the water with it, you wouldn't have known about it. So, anyway, either way, it's still a bloody good whiskey. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Again, a big thank you to all the distilleries and distributors for kindly sending samples for today's episode of the show. The Antiquary wine finish, lovely, absolutely gorgeous, really good value for money, and not much more I can say about it really. The Hinch Craft and Cask, again, beautiful balance. It's, you know, that's what I look for in a whiskey. I look for complexity, balance, and often the progression as well as, and that certainly had plenty of progression. Absolutely gorgeous. Lindores Abbey, like I said, if you haven't tasted it yet, then I think you really ought to. It is just a gorgeous whiskey. Pretty complex again for a young spirit. Yes, all right, you can argue the complexity is built up from the use of different cask types, but how many young distilleries have been released in the last year or two that have done exactly the same sort of thing? And it's not like it's there's no spirit character whatsoever. I mean, it certainly has that. It's just, again, really beautifully balanced, and certainly I think worth looking at or searching out. Tomintoul, again, a typical of example of how to use a finishing cask. Absolutely gorgeous. Unusual nose insofar that it was almost sort of Tomintoul like on the nose to a certain extent, but certainly the palate displayed plenty of balance, and again really nice. Torvaig, again, gorgeous spirit, just blows me away how good it is at such a young age, and this is going to be certainly one to watch, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to when that gets a few more years under its belt. And the Port Charlotte, again, gorgeous whiskey, big fan of Port Charlotte, big fan of Bruichladdich, as you well know, don't need to tell you that. Yeah, again, really well balanced, good length, good, and just all round a beautiful whiskey, as long as you like your peated malts, of course, at the end of the day. So, which I do. So I personally think it's pretty damn good. Right, so that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's been really intriguing, been really good fun, it has to be said. Well, not a lot else to say apart from the usual. Good dramming and good afternoon.